Welcome to Around and Around, the OCD Circle. My name is Elizabeth, and I have been living with obsessive-compulsive disorder for over 60 years. I am not a therapist or a member of the medical community. I am just an ordinary person like yourself who will be sharing my thoughts and experiences with you, with the hope that you will feel less alone. If you don't have OCD, I hope you will learn some information that will help you understand this disorder better. Some of the topics I will be covering may be triggering for you as a listener. If so, I apologize in advance. Since I don't know what your triggers are, please refer to the episode summary in the show notes before listening to each episode. If at any time you feel like hurting yourself or ending your life, please call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988 if you are in the United States. It is open 24 hours a day, and you will be connected with the nearest crisis center to receive immediate counseling and local mental health referrals. Now, on to today's episode. Welcome to Around and Around, the OCD Circle. My name is Elizabeth, and I have been living with obsessive-compulsive disorder for over 60 years. I am not a therapist or a member of the medical community. I am just an ordinary person like yourself who will be sharing my thoughts and experiences with you, with the hope that you will feel less alone. If you don't have OCD, I hope you will learn some information that will help you understand this disorder better. Some of the topics I will be covering may be triggering for you as a listener. If so, I apologize in advance. Since I don't know what your triggers are, please refer to the episode summary in the show notes before listening to each episode. If at any time you feel like hurting yourself or ending your life, please call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988 if you are in the United States. It is open 24 hours a day, and you will be connected with the nearest crisis center to receive immediate counseling and local mental health referrals. Now, on to today's episode. Today's episode is the conclusion of my conversation with Simon Rinne. Simon has lived with mental illness for over 30 years. He started Mindful Men in 2021 to share his story and help normalize discussions about mental health. In today's conversation, Simon talks about self-care, his sobriety, and how he is currently managing his OCD. We discuss how the term OCD is used incorrectly in society, and he talks about his organization Mindful Men and how he works with clients in an unconventional way to encourage boys and men to open up, get vulnerable, and deal with the issues that are troubling them. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and that it helps you feel less alone. What are some of the ways that you're coping with OCD right now?
Yeah, so at the moment, right at this moment, it's a lot of self-care. So making sure that I'm eating right, I'm sleeping, exercising, connecting as well. So quality social connections has been a big thing for me the last 12 months, really finding people in my local area that I can connect with at the same level. Guys, particularly guys that want to talk about their feelings and emotions and vulnerabilities, talk about mindfulness, not necessarily about OCD, because I'm still the only person I know really with OCD outside of some of my clients, but just want to have genuine relationships. So that's been really well, because when I'm feeling good in all those areas, I know they sound cliche, but when you're feeling good with your self-care, then your mental health kind of is in check. You're doing well as well. Other things, when it does peak as a small business owner, I get really stressed and the perfectionism tries to come in and all that type of stuff. I know to reach out to different people. So my wife has been an amazing rock for me. She's the rational one. I'm the head case, if you could call it that. But she's been amazing. But also reaching out to business coaches, someone to help guide me so I don't have to try and figure it out in my head, because often my brain doesn't have the space to figure it out because it's so obsessed with being, just the OCD is just filled it. So I don't have much space to add in there. So reaching out to different supports. But a couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, I did the exposure response prevention, which was really useful to learn a bit more about OCD because I still only had a superficial level understanding. So learning about it, so the education part, but also developing strategies around the checking stuff, the checking behaviors, particularly around checking at nighttime and checking my locks and windows. A really cool one, two really cool ones, if you don't mind me sharing, is one where my therapist would say, Simon, if you're at the door and you find yourself checking, you just got to say, oh, this is my OCD checking this door. And what it does is it takes the thought, because it's often done up in my brain, in my thinking, it takes it out and verbalizes it. It makes it external to the body. And that was a really good way to separate me from the OCD. And I go, and when I'm saying this to myself at 1 o'clock in the morning, in the hallway, in the dark, trying not to wake up the wife and kids, so my OCD is telling me to check the door, it just kind of disempowers the OCD because it externalizes it. And I go, you know what? I'm going back to bed. The door's been locked all night. I don't have to keep checking that. And so that's been a really powerful moment. But also, OCD for many people is doing things in a certain order. So for me, it was checking the house in a certain order, starting with the front door, front rooms, side door, back rooms, etc. Always in the same order. But what my therapist taught me was to change the order, to mess with the OCD instead of the OCD messing with me. And so instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that order, maybe go 1, 3, 5, 4, 2. And just totally mess it up, jumble it all up, because it disempowers the OCD as well, because the OCD tells you have to do something in a certain way for you to satisfy that that the worst thing in the world is not going to happen. But by messing it up, and it empowers us to take back control and go, you know what? I'm not going to listen to you, OCD. I'm going to go and do things my way. And then when I was feeling really good, and I'm at this stage now, is I can actually start skipping some of those numbers. So I'm now able to skip a certain number of windows in my house. I don't need to check them because I'm satisfied that we'll be okay if they're not completely closed or the blinds aren't closed as well. So it went from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to mixing up all that numbers, and now it might be 2, 3, 5, 4, and getting rid of number 1. And so disempowering it that way as well by messing up the order has been really useful as well. So they're two coping strategies I use at the moment. A lot of the other stuff, I don't hum anymore. Thank God. I'm doing the cursive thing again at the moment. I think it's just stress because we're also selling our house at this very moment. So I think I've just got a lot going on. But yeah, other things is so checking in with supports and messing with the OCD, externalizing it from yourself is really empowering, and they're my go-tos outside of the self-care stuff too.
I've talked about that a lot on my podcast. That's how I completely get rid of rituals, is I throw a wrench into it. I would go wash my hands in a different sink.
Yeah.
Or I'd wash it in a different way, and eventually they would stop just throwing a wrench into it. So
a wrench at it and the flamethrower as well. Just throw whatever you've got at it.
I see a guitar in the background. I just finished a show about self-love. Do you play the guitar? Is that what that's back there? I played
the guitar a lot.
I bet that's
during my teens.
I bet that's very relaxing.
Yeah, and I used to find that singing, I taught myself to sing and play at the same time, and thinking back on it, I never knew it at the time, but thinking back on it, I would often feel a lot of relief after I've had a good jam session. These days, it's more for the kids. The kids come here and thrash around and scratch it all up and ding it, and they love it. But it's something that I have it in the back of my room as well, to remind me that creativity is important for me to be well. So whenever I can be creative, and I find podcasting is a creative expression as well, because we're telling stories. But it's a reminder every day that I need to be creative in some way to just maintain my self-care. So yeah, guitar music's been good. Art, I love drawing. I love puzzles. I still love my sport and playing it. In fact, surfing has become my new jam at the moment. So I've lived in the Sunshine Coast here for, I think, 5 or 6 years, and every year I'd ask my wife for surfing lessons, and she never did it. So last year I did it myself, and I actually found a mental health themed surf school
Wow.
where they teach you for 6 weeks to learn to surf, but also the first half of it is around mindfulness and wellness. And so, doing that with 10 other people, learning to surf, was a really amazing experience. And now I've bought my own board, and I meet up with some quality connections. So I've started a men's boards, brews, and blokes group. So it's just guys getting together on a Wednesday morning for a coffee and a surf, and all experience. I'm the worst surfer there by far. Like, I am in the whites, and they're all at the back doing flips and getting tubes and all sorts of stuff. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. We're just there connecting. Then we grab a coffee afterwards, and then we head off to work on a Wednesday morning. So these things are ways for self-love, self-care, self-expression that are also really important for our general well-being, but also helps keep that OCD in check too.
I want to change the subject for just a second before I forget. Do you
Mm.
do you know of anyone else in your family who has OCD?
No,
No.
no, no,
Okay.
definitely not. And,
Okay.
and even in my broader social circles, but interestingly, when I started sharing my OCD story, so many people that I knew of, like work colleagues in my old job,
Hmm.
would come to me and say, I used to do some of the stuff, or I know someone who does that type of stuff, or I know someone with OCD. I'm like, really? Like, because I've never known anyone really with OCD outside of myself. And now my work as a therapist. And so, yeah, it's interesting when you start sharing the story, who pops out of the woodwork and says, oh, I'm feeling the same. One of the things I do challenge them on, though, is I often hear that, oh, I'm a little bit OCD,
I was just going to ask you
or
that, how you feel about that.
it used to happen a lot in the workplace. And just after diagnosis, I didn't really care. But the further that I progressed in my professional career, because I used to be in the public service, and people would always say it. They'd see a PowerPoint on the wall, and maybe someone's forgot a full stop at the end of a sentence. And someone would always say, "Oh, I'm so OCD. I wish that full stop was there." I'm like, if only you knew what it was like
Does it
to
irritate
be
you?
OCD. It irritates me,
Yeah.
but I would often just be quiet. But then after burning out and sharing my story, because I shared that story in the workplace of burnout, but also a little bit about OCD, and eventually I would just pipe up and say, that's not OCD. That's just you struggling with someone's poor grammar.
Hmm.
You know, OCD is really debilitating for a lot of people. And if you even knew part of my story, you wouldn't be sitting here talking, shedding, joking about it. Another one that came up around the same time, because it was COVID as well. Someone said, "Oh, the OCD people would love it at the moment because everyone's washing their hands." I'm like, I don't know. I just like, are you serious?
Hmm.
Contamination OCD is not part of my OCD as well, and that's really
Mine
important to know.
either.
Like, for some people, it really is, and some people it isn't. And so, not everyone with OCD is a neat freak. If you saw my house, it's the bombs hit it. I've got 2 kids under 7,
Hmm.
and I'm not going to spend all my day cleaning up after them. They've got to learn how to do that. So, and I don't wash my hands religiously. I wash my hands like a normal person would wash their hands,
Hmm.
but I'm not sitting there. But I get other people with OCD really do, and so the more I think we can challenge that type of stuff, and I love seeing the OCD community come to life on social media, because
Right.
they put out the post saying it's not a personality quirk, it's not a little trait that you've got, it's not cool to be OCD. I think it's cool that OCDers talk about OCD with each other and share stories. That's really cool, and we can inspire each other and other people to understand OCD. But it's not something that you just wake up with today and go, oh, I'm a little bit OCD today, let's get on with it, because
Yeah.
that doesn't serve anybody, and it is debilitating. And as I said, like 3.5 decades for me, longer for you, although you don't look a day over 30.
Oh, thank you. I have 5
but,
grandchildren, so
but it
I,
is a lifetime thing.
the
So, it is tough. Yeah.
the example I always like to give is someone says, well, I'm OCD because I separate my M&Ms by color, and I say, well, do you think someone's going to die because if you keep them all together, someone's going to die? Like,
Mm,
that's OCD. You
yeah.
have to do it for or something's going to happen, or you just have to do it. It's not And it gets, several of my guests have expressed extreme frustration over the way OCD is thrown around, just like the word love and, things like that. It's just, we put them in their place. One of my guests said that she even had a business card made that said, when she hears somebody do that, it said, "I have OCD," and it talked about what OCD really is. And she would hand them the business
Mm.
card and walk away because it made her so mad.
Yeah, I even see businesses with OCD in the business name. Like I saw
Yes,
one the other day,
absolutely.
OCD concreting or
Hmm.
OCD cleaning, and I'm
Hmm.
just like, I hope that they're coming from a place of lived experience
Hmm.
as opposed to just saying that we're perfect and we're going to do the best jobs. That's something that I've noticed more recently that I'd love to see change. How we do that, I don't really know, but yeah, that's something that irks me. But at the same time, I just let a lot of stuff go because if
Yeah.
we hold on to the grudge or the annoyance, it just gets us
Yep,
down,
we
and
just
we've
have to
already
laugh
been
at
down.
ourselves at times, that get through it with
Yes,
a sense of humor. And what
yes.
are you on? This may be too personal. Are you on any medications right now?
Yeah, so I'm on one called Valdoxin. So I've been
Hmm.
on all sorts of ones. The reason I was on Valdoxin because I struggled to sleep. My brain would wake up in the middle of the night, and I'd sleep. It works for me. I've heard other people it doesn't work for them. But I've been on a whole range of different ones, and I have come off of medication at various times, thinking that I'm all good,
Yeah.
to realize I'm not all good, and
I've been
I do need
medication
that
free for
balancing.
9 years now, so I've been.
Wow.
And I may go back, and like I always tell my listeners, what works for Simon may not work for you.
Yes.
Our metabolisms are different, our bodies, our brains are all different. So please don't go by the medication he just said. But I always
Yes.
like to hear about medications people are using because I haven't heard of some of them. And just
I
because
th-
I'm medication free does not mean I'm against medication. Absolutely, if you need it, you need to take it. It can save your life.
yeah.
And in the future, I may need it again. But
Yeah,
for
and
right
I hope that
now,
one day I can come off as well. And I think for me, a lot of my challenge and my downfall was I was drinking still,
mhm,
even on the meds. And but since I've been sober since August last year, so I think I'm maybe getting towards a point where eventually I might be able to come off and actually stay off. But the drinking never helped. I thought it was helping, but it
right.
didn't really ever help. And I should know better as a therapist. And I think part of the reason I stopped drinking was I felt like I was living a double life as a therapist, saying to my clients, "You've got to stop drinking. Drinking's a depressant."
Hmm.
But I was doing exactly the opposite. And so I think maybe when I do, yeah, go down a bit further down the track, maybe I won't need medication. As I said, and I'm glad that you said what works for me doesn't necessarily work for
Right.
other people. I know people that have been on my medication and it didn't work at all. I've been on other medications which didn't work for me. And so I've been trialing different stuff, but I always do it with a medical professional. I don't just make the assumption that I'm going to change. I talk to my GP. I've got a really good GP who specializes in men's mental health and also has a really good pharmaceutical background as well. So he's not just plucking medications out of the air. He's actually done a bit of work and research into different medications for mental health. So I'm very lucky that my GP is like that. But when my GP is not around, I'll go see a psychiatrist because they're trained with medications as well and try different things and even talk to them about, is it time to come off? And they'll be like, is it, Simon? Let's have a good, honest chat about that. But eventually, yeah, I'd like to get to that stage as well. When that is, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you want to discuss before we talk about mindful men? Oh, I
Yeah.
was going to ask you one more thing. Can I,
Yes. Yes. Go
before
for it.
it'll leave my brain? Have you ever been suicidal?
Yeah. So my teens definitely.
Okay.
Those nights and then when I said that affirmation, certainly had thought about that. Spent a long time in a very deep, dark depression as well.
Okay.
Interesting that what's come up recently and is around this intrusive thought notion as well. And I think about a year ago or 2 years ago, in the burnout stage as well, this pops into my head. Like, what if I just drive off the car off a road and hit a tree or something like that? And I got really scared when I started thinking like that because I hadn't thought about that since I was a teenager
Mhm.
and in my early 20s. I'm like, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I've got a business. Like, what am I thinking like that? And I was actually worried that my OCD was morphing into something new. And so I was scared to talk about this actually with my wife and my GP because I was worried about them leaving. Like, what, Simon's
Right.
having suicidal thoughts again? What's going on? But then when I shared it with my wife. She said, "Look, I don't like that. That sounds really scary. We've got to protect our family, but I love you. I support you. Go see your GP, talk to them." And I'm glad I did, because when I went to the GP, I was really worried the OCD was morphing. He said, "Simon, this is just an intrusive thought." And he just
Okay.
reassured me. He's like, "This is a thought that comes into your brain, sticks around, and it just gets stuck with you because of the OCD. It just gets stuck and you feel like you've got to do something. But what we've got to do is just let it go." And this is the mindfulness, is just let it go. That really reassured me that I wasn't suicidal anymore. Like, I was just having these intrusive thoughts that presented as suicidal
Okay.
ideation. And I'm glad that I, talked about that, because if I dwelled on that, that would just morph into something really dark, and I didn't want that in my life.
Yeah. I've been wanting to do a show on suicide because I made two suicide attempts in 1 month, not recently. And then we just lost someone, that we knew in December to suicide. And I just feel like it's fresh in my mind, and I want to do a show about it, but I don't
Mm.
want it to trigger people. And so I don't know, it's in the works, but,
Yeah.
um, okay. So mindful men, can you tell me a little bit about, what made you want to start mindful men and
Yeah,
what it is and what it offers? And
absolutely. So when I was growing up and as a teenager and coming to the end of high school, I always, you start thinking about careers.
mhm,
And a lot of us don't really know what we want to do. But I always said to myself, I want to do something that helps people like me. I didn't know that it was a mental health professional. I didn't know if it was a social worker, counselor, psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever. This was the words. I want to help someone who's just like me. Um, I went to university, started a psychology degree. Still didn't know what a psychologist did. It was just a course in a big book of university courses. But I dropped out because I struggled with the statistics component, the maths. I'm very good with my words and English, but no good with numbers. Numbers is terrible, which is really bad as a business owner that I'm saying that. But so I dropped out of that, and I ended up in the public service, just these random jobs, which are really interesting and good. But I always had this burning desire to work in what I now know as mental health. And so, mid 2000, I think it was 2015, decided to go back and study my master's degree, and started a social work degree, and wanted to be a social worker because it was flexible, it was creative. I could do things creatively. And then that just coincided around, midway through that with the burnout story and me wanting to get out of that old career and do something more meaningful. And this idea popped into my head of starting my own business. And I've always wanted to have my own business. And I thought, well, let's use my lived experience and my learned experience to do that. And I can get into mental health and start a therapy clinic. And I've never had a business and never owned a therapy clinic. My experience in therapy was being the client for 11 years, but also I had done some student placements in a private practice. So I had a bit of an idea of what to expect and what to do in a therapy clinic. So started Mindful Men initially as an Instagram page to share stories about men's mental health, and then just use that Mindful Men banner to create the business about 2 years ago now, and left that old job, which was huge, to leave that old stable career, which had stable income, could pay the bills, to then go in to try and find clients and have to work out how do you run a business and all that type of stuff. So that's where it was born, and it was born out of the lived and learned experience. And what it is a men's therapy business, predominantly here in Australia. So working with mental health and disability. I work in both spaces, and we take therapy out of a clinic. So we do beach walking, we go get a coffee, we might go for a drive or play video games, kick a footy, shoot hoops, whatever it is that helps the guy that I'm working with to open up, to feel comfortable. And I like that because it's creative. Again, the creativity comes back in, but also it allows us to be imperfect. We don't have to sit there in a clinical space being the perfect therapist-client relationship. We can be messy. We can joke around. We can make fun of each other. There's a bit of banter that happens to create that rapport. And also it enables my brain to shut down as well. So I'm not sitting in there stressed in a clinic room all day, every day with no windows, or if there is a window, just looking at the same scenery.
mhm.
I can get that gentle exercise as well, get the vitamin D. I can have that nice cup of coffee with someone and a really authentic, genuine chat. So it's therapy done differently, but it is still therapy. If you come into it, we still do all the tools and I give you homework and all that type of stuff. But I also learn as much from my clients as well. So the ones with OCD, we share stories and I hear their resilience and their inspiration. And I go away going, you know what? This is an amazing thing that we're doing. So that's the therapy. That's Mindful Men, the therapy, plus the social media, which I still do, but also the Mindful Men podcast. So again, we use this platform to share stories and inspire other men and women across the globe, because I think it's important to have women's voices in the men's world as well, to hear different perspectives of life, and just hear stories of inspiration of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. So that's Mindful Men as a brand, and welcome anyone to connect in with me, share their stories or listen to the podcast and share their favorite bits. It's something that is really magical for me and something that really lights me up. I guess a purpose that has come from so much pain in my life.
And I will put a link to your webpage in the show notes for anyone who wants to contact you. Do you ever work with any women or children? Or is it
I do work with children. So I say men, but my youngest man is 13 at the moment, and it goes up to 67. Women don't tend to call me up, but I do speak to a lot of women, and I am open to women. It's more about, it's not about the gender that you have or the gender that you identify with. It's about the connection. And so if you can come into the clinic and we connect, it's going to work. And sometimes, women, they want a male voice to a situation that they're going through. Maybe it's OCD as well. But I'm yet to have someone book in, but who knows, maybe tomorrow after hearing this episode. That might happen.
Are you only able to do this in Australia because of the laws?
So I'm doing therapy in Australia, not so much the laws, but more the insurance component. So for my professional indemnity, but I am looking at doing a coaching course and using that lived and learned experience to do more life coaching, which is less of the internal trauma and more about looking forward and the steps that we can do, which are all therapy tools in themselves. And that will be open to worldwide. So that's something I'm looking to hopefully get up and running in 2024. So.
Well, what I always ask my guest at the end of the episode is if you have any words of wisdom you'd like to leave with the listeners.
Yeah, I love this Tony Robbins quote. I was introduced to it through my social work degree, and I think it highlights my life so much and where I'm at the moment. It's that change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. And so in an OCD world, we stick in the same. We do the same thing every single day, and it's painful. But we can really break out of that, and it's painful to change our habits, maybe to tell OCD I don't have to do this in a certain number or order or whatever. We throw the spanner in, as we talked about earlier. Once we get over that initial hurdle, we can have real positive growth in our lives. So I'm really love that quote because it just emphasizes that it might be scary to do something different or painful to do something different, but when we do, we often get a lot of growth out of it, and we can change old habits, like no longer humming to ourselves.
Absolutely.
Or writing cursive letters on our fingers, or checking doors and windows for 3 to 4 hours a night. I don't do that anymore. I've got the OCD in control at the moment. I don't have to do a lot of the stuff that I have done historically, and it just all comes with getting ourselves out there, sharing our stories, trying something new, finding what meds work for you if that's your thing, self-care. It all comes about looking at life holistically and not getting sucked into what the OCD is trying to tell us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Simon, and I hope you have a wonderful week, and you're always welcome back at any time.
Beth, I've loved it. Thanks so much. And thanks for all the work you're doing. Sharing OCD stories around the world is really valuable.
You're very welcome. Isn't Simon amazing? I hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as I did. You can reach Simon at the links below in the show notes. We would love to see you in our Facebook group, where you can meet and get to know others who have obsessive-compulsive disorder. If you would like to contact me or would like to share your OCD story on this podcast, please reach out to me at any of my social media contacts below. Don't forget that a new full episode will drop early Monday morning. Remember that OCD, while it cannot be cured, it can be managed, and I am living proof of that. I hope you all have a fantastic week, and I hope you will join me next time on Around and Around the OCD Circle.